and off the top.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Thank you again for attending the latest webinar series that we have, the NC State Apiculture Program. My name is David Tarpey, and I've been holding these webinars in lieu of county visits to our 75 county chapters across the state for the last several years. Our virtual hosts for this evening are the Guilford County beekeepers. So we really appreciate them hosting, and hi to everybody in Guilford County. There are also many other county clubs that are chiming in here as well, and we appreciate all of you for attending, as well as all of you individuals that are attending from home or wherever is convenient. So the topic for this evening is potential threats to beekeeping in the U.S. So this is something that we had discussed with the Guilford County beekeepers, and they thought this was a very timely topic, and I agree. It's a very important topic. It's kind of a scary topic as well, but I hope not to scare, but more to inform and really talk about the future and what may be coming down the turnpike in future years, and things that that we really need to be on the lookout for. So with that, I just want to, before we get into tonight's topic, I do want to make some quick brief announcements about other beekeeping educational opportunities that are out there in North Carolina. Of course, the NCSBA meeting is coming up very rapidly. It's at the very end of February this year. It's going to be in New Bern, North Carolina, so the eastern part of the state. Really excellent town, excellent local beekeeping clubs there as well. And of course, this is bee school season. So there are dozens and dozens of bee schools all across the state. So check the NCSBA webpage for the local offerings. Most of them fill up very, very quickly. So be sure to check those, and I'm sure that you'll be able to find something locally. If not, we still do continue to have our online beekeeper education and engagement system, or the Bees Network, where we have online courses that can be taken a la carte and at your convenience at really any time. It is all online. So there is no hands-on component, obviously, but it is geared towards getting people up and going from knowing nothing about beekeeping to really being able to start their own hive. And there are also advanced content on there as well. The courses, however, have moved over to a new server with our Distance Education Learning and Technology Center called Delta. And in doing that, they've built in this new price structure. So while each course is still only $25 as a donation to our program, they're tacking on an additional 43% overhead. So as of January 1st, the courses have gone from $25 to $37. So, but it's still, I think, worth it and very convenient for 1 or 2 hours of a mini course on all sorts of different topics out there. So. Okay, so as far as potential threats to U.S. beekeeping, I'm really, what I'm referring to in this topic, I mean, this is a very large, obviously there's a lot of discussion, a lot of different things that beekeepers are dealing with. But I'm limiting this discussion tonight to really just the biological threats. Really, I'm talking about introductions of diseases and pest organisms that affect colony health. And this is because these are the main threats that we're dealing with today, right? So tracheomites, varroa mites, small hive beetle, Nosema cerana, Africanized honeybees, these are all introduced to the U.S. and affect colony health in one way or another. So I'm specifically not going to be talking about political threats or lack of funding for for monitoring or for different types of issues that deal with non-biological threats, although that's another topic entirely that could take up yet another hour. So I'm trying to limit the discussion here to these important biological threats. So in doing so, I think it's really important to recognize those agencies at the federal and state level that are there to address just these issues already. So these are, these are the soldiers at the front line that really deal with issues dealing with animal health and including honeybees. And so at the federal level, it's the USDA agency known as APHIS, that stands for the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. And these are the guys that they monitor the sound entry, and they are looking and looking for anything that might be introduced that might be invasive. They also look at imports, so all the shipping containers that are coming off the ports, coming out of the ports. They're looking for those things, that could invade, the U.S. Agricultural industry. So they have very much, they have many programs that are out there that are looking specifically for many of the threats that we're talking about today. In state, have, of course, the NCBA, and Don Hopkins, as the state apiarist, is the head of the Apiary Inspection Service that has been doing a really excellent job, not just in promoting beekeeping and keeping bees healthy and safe in the state. They're also very proactive in looking at a lot of these potential new threats out there, which is why
I gotta go check the chicken.
We have him here tonight to be able to answer questions. Can I ask somebody who's on the teleconference, please, to mute their telephones so that we're picking up other conversations going on? Thank you. So these are the main potential threats that Don and I had discussed, and seem to be the ones that are the most significant, the ones that we know of. I think Don brought up the good analogy of the Donald Rumsfeld of we have the known knowns, the unknown knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns, right? So there's this is very true for potential threats to U.S. beekeeping as well. These are I guess the known knowns, right? These are the ones that we know about. We know that they're really a potential threat. What's really worrisome are those kind of unknown unknowns where we really don't know that they even exist yet. So, but we'll just stick with the things that we really do worry us, and with the regulatory authorities about introductions that could really affect beekeeping. Top on the list is another mite. Just in case you haven't gotten enough of varroa mites, there's another mite out there called Tropilaelaps. So Tropilaelaps clareae is a parasitic mite of the giant honeybee Apis dorsata. So unlike varroa, the varroa mite co-evolved with Apis cerana and then switched hosts to our honeybee and has since spread. So this parasitic mite was on another host, the giant honeybee, but it too has switched hosts to our honeybee, Apis mellifera. It has been spreading in the southeastern Asia. So it's in it's all the way down to Papua New Guinea, and as far north as northeastern China, and as far west as Pakistan. It also has been introduced to other areas. For example, it has become established in Kenya, which can be very problematic, and it has been introduced to certain places in Europe, particularly Germany, Italy, and I believe the former Soviet Union or Russia, but it was eradicated when they were introduced. So they have not gained a foothold, though. But it does, I think, illustrate how these different organisms can get around through shipment, either accidentally or incidentally, and so they can show up and potentially become established and therefore be problematic. Now, the way that Tropilaelaps works is really not unlike the varroa mite. It's just a lot faster. And it's also smaller, as you can see from this picture over here. It's about a third or a quarter of the size of the varroa mite. So while varroa mites are pretty big, people still tend to have some difficulty in seeing them on sticky boards and in other areas. So if you have difficulty in seeing varroa, you're going to have particular difficulty in seeing Tropilaelaps. Because they're smaller, they just don't have the jaws that can pierce and parasitize adult bees, so they don't really ride around on the backs of adults like varroa do. They need to go from brood cell to brood cell, otherwise they perish. As a result, they move very quickly, they scurry very quickly, and you can see them crawling across the comb when you go into a colony with these mites in it. Just like varroa, they parasitize the brood and they cause brood to die, so you get irregular brood patterns and you get disformed brood. They emerge, or at least the bees emerge, with disformed wings. And so you can see them crawling at the entrances. And this makes it very difficult to distinguish from a varroa problem. Again, I have to ask everybody on the telephone to make sure that you mute your microphone, or mute your, if you can mute your phone, we're hearing, otherwise I'm going to have to turn off the teleconference and everybody on the teleconference is going to disappear. Thank you. Really the only way to verify if a colony has a Tropilaelaps infestation is the visible confirmation of seeing these fast scurrying mites that are running around on the combs. So it's pretty difficult to distinguish. The one thing that is really scary about the mite, which makes it kind of a 10 out of 10 as far as the real risk and why government agencies are worried about this mite, is that they are so effective at killing off the brood that it's the best way to get rid of varroa. That they kill off so much brood inside the colony that they outcompete varroa, so that varroa populations crash inside colonies that have infections of both. So that's not good news, right? So anything that makes varroa mite look, pale in comparison is a really kind of nasty problem to have. So the Tropilaelaps mite is really kind of a #1 concern that we definitely don't want to come here. Now, that said, there are efforts underway that Don himself personally is involved in that's funded by the USDA APHIS, but is in collaboration and cooperation with the various state apiary inspectors, where they are monitoring for Tropilaelaps and other potential threats to see, if and when that they're coming. So they're being very proactive in monitoring for this and other threats. So the way that they do that are ways that you can measure Tropilaelaps in your colonies, if and when they ever do get here, is using a sticky board, just like we do with varroa mites. One of the easiest and earliest detection methods is to go into brood and scrape open the brood, just like you can for varroa mite infestations, but to scrape open the cappings and see if there are any mites in there scurrying around. But the method that Don has been using in the national survey is known as this bump method, which is pretty much you take a comb of, is it uncapped or capped brood? I think it's capped brood, right? Okay, so a transitionary brood frame where part of it is capped and part of it is older worker larvae, and you shake all the bees off of it, and then you bang the frame on both sides, so any mites that are inside the open brood cells will fall out, and then you do it into a tray so that they're captured inside the tray. And so you've been doing that for 8 years now? For 8 years, and we've, of course, never found one. Otherwise, this would be big news, right? So, so we've never found these mites, and this is nationwide, so not just here in North Carolina. But they are indeed looking for something that isn't here yet, which I think is very, very reassuring. There's a question here about, is Avogard effective against Tropilaelaps? The answer is yes, but we don't really know how effective. Typically what works pretty well on a varroa mite will work well on this mite, but because they reproduce so much more quickly, because they're smaller, dosages can be very sensitive. You know, it's very important to re-establish the label for any mite treatments for Tropilaelaps if they really do get here. So it probably is effective. The question is how effective that we really need to answer. Because, again, they can't ride along on the adult bees, the one saving grace of this mite is that they have to be in areas where bees never go broodless. So, you know, presumably up in the mountains or in colder regions, you know, this mite may not be able to survive the winter. So far they're restricted to a tropical distribution, and let's just hope that they remain there. Sorry, I'm muting some people here. I really appreciate if people can mute their microphones here. Getting a lot of feedback here, so please, I appreciate that. Okay, the second major threat that could be introduced to the United States is it's actually another honeybee subspecies. So this is known as the Cape bee, or the Latin name is Apis mellifera capensis. So again, it's a honeybee that's just like our honeybee, but it's restricted to a very, very small area in the southern tip of Africa. And I need to remove this participant. They are restricted to that particular area, and but there's a particular trait of these bees where the adult workers can lay fertilized eggs. So as you know, most adult workers, they very rarely are able to lay eggs, and when they do, they only develop into drones. Well, this particular strain of bees is able to lay other workers or indeed queens. And so that makes them able to invade other colonies and become parasitic and take over those colonies. So that process of being able to lay fertilized eggs is called solidiky. That's a genetic kind of accident, really, where, you know, the typical laying worker can lay these unfertilized eggs and they become male offspring. The Cape bees, they take these unfertilized eggs and they kind of fertilize themselves. And and then that causes that offspring to be female. So again, they can develop into workers or queens. Again, somebody has their microphone on, and it's really causing a lot of feedback. I'm going through here and I'm turning off everybody's microphone. My apologies, but it's been causing a lot of people some headaches here. Okay, thank you. All right, so so this ability to parasitize, other colonies. Now, in Africa, of course, if we go back to sub-Saharan Africa and South Africa, so this Transvaal region is this very unique, very different habitat in the Cape of South Africa. And so these Cape bees are very well adjusted to that particular area. But all up here in northern South Africa or in the rest of southern Africa is predominated by Apis mellifera scutellata, which of course was introduced and became the Africanized killer bees. And so when beekeepers transport bees from this region to up here, this is when that parasitism can occur. So you start getting these Cape bees invading these scutellata colonies, and they start laying eggs that typically would just be cannibalized by the resident bees, because any worker laid eggs, they just get policed. But somehow these Cape bees are able to mimic the queen pheromones on the eggs so that they don't get eaten. And so they fully develop, and again, they develop into females. And so as more and more capensis females increase within the colony, they do less work for that colony, and so the overall colony dwindles and dies, and then they spread to other colonies. So it can be pretty problematic for this kind of social parasitism to occur. And while it's just restricted right now to South Africa, any introduction of this subspecies of bees could be very, very problematic. They have not been introduced anywhere else in the world, right? So it is still just restricted to the native region. But with the shipment of bees and other biological material, it is possible that they could also arrive here and could be a real headache for us. A third potential problem, which is probably kind of low on the scale as far as risk and problems, is the large hive beetle. So, we, of course, are dealing with the small hive beetle, which has really been problematic for beekeepers in the state for almost, over 15 years now, going on 20 years now. But there's a small hive beetle to distinguish it from another beetle called the large hive beetle. And there's a picture of it here right on the entrance, so you can see they are bigger than honeybees themselves. So they are not these small little things of small hive beetles. These are big, gargantuan, scary-looking things. And they pretty much have the same range that the small hive beetle has in sub-Saharan Africa. While they can be pests of hives and nest material, unlike the small hive beetle, they do not have a damaging phase of the larval phase. So they are usually just scavengers. They're a scarab beetle. They're not a nididulid like the small hive beetle. So they're actually quite unrelated, even though their names sound fairly similar. So they're probably just more opportunistic of abandoned combs and things like that, where they will eat the wax and the pollen and even the propolis, but they're probably more akin to like the wax moths, where they will eat any stored equipment, but they're not going to invade a colony, and they're not going to cause kind of that slimy mess and and all the other destruction that the small hive beetles do. So they're fairly low on the scale, but again, it's possible that they could be introduced as well. The whole issue of honeybee viruses is one that continues to stymie and to be a problem, and just more unknowns than there are knowns. But there are, we're kind of adding to our knowledge base about, different viruses that are out there and those that have economic importance. And there's a whole nother webinar that's been recorded and published several months ago on the honeybee viruses that are being monitored now and can cause problems and health concerns for bees. But there's two kind of new ones on the horizon that are, again, being monitored as part of this national survey that is being done by APHIS and the NCDA. And that is known as the slow bee paralysis virus, or the SBPV. This is a relatively new virus that's been described in Europe, but there's kind of a double-edged sword here. One is that this is a very incredibly virulent virus. What happens is that when bees are infected with this virus, very strangely, it paralyzes their two front legs, but nothing else. And so the bees are crawling around, but they can't walk properly because of their paralyzed two front legs. But then they die only a few days later after infection. So it's incredibly virulent. But the good thing about that is that it's fairly rare, because the bees die off so quickly that it doesn't have a chance to spread. Now, like most other viruses, they are vectored by Varroa, so they can be spread horizontally within a colony. But again, because the bees die so quickly, they don't spread like wildfire. They don't spread as widely. But nonetheless, because it is so virulent, and because the virulence of these viruses can change and evolve over time, this is another target that the National Survey has been looking at and has been screening for colonies for this virus. Even though it's not known to be in the U.S., they're still looking for it. In 36 states is where so it's a very widespread screen that they're looking for this.
Reason for that survey.
Yep.
Tropilaelaps and small.
Yep.
Slowly.
Yep. So this, along with the Tropilaelaps, are really the impetus behind that national survey. Those are the top two things that they're looking for. So maybe I should have put this risk factor up a little bit higher on that then. Yeah. There is another virus that was just described just a couple months ago. It's a new recombinant version of the deformed wing virus. So of course, deformed wing virus is, we know it as kind of the calling card of the Varroa mite, because the Varroa mite is vectoring this around, and it's symptomatic where we see these bees with shriveled up wings. Well, researchers in the UK found a distinct type. There are many types of this, two main types, type A and type B of deformed wing virus that infect our bees, and both are found here. But they describe this new type C deformed wing virus that probably recombined with another type of virus to create an entirely distinct new virus, really, and we don't really know how virulent it is. It's one of those things where these viruses can evolve so quickly because they can swap genetic material among them. They're not very loyal to species by any means. And so these new recombinants happen all the time, and just kind of a freak of nature. And this is something that has people concerned as well, whether this new type C deformed wing virus may be more virulent and more problematic than the other two that we already have. Another pretty scary potential introduction is the Asian hornet. Now, there are several different types of Asian hornets, but in particular, the Japanese hornet is one that is notorious for going out there and killing off honeybees. Now, we should really note, very importantly here, that we do have a type of hornet that looks very similar, and it's about the same size. It's the European hornet. Sometimes it's erroneously referred to as the Japanese hornet, but we do not have this particular problematic hornet, the Japanese hornet. It's still only located in Japan, but again, if it's ever introduced to the U.S., it could be really problematic, because a single hornet can kill 40 honeybees in a single minute. They go through and they just guillotine the adult workers, just like this poor worker here, in their jaws, and they can just go through and chomp through the adult workers, and an entire colony can an entire colony of this Japanese hornet can kill off a honeybee colony in a matter of hours. Now, what they're doing is they're just killing off the adult workers so that they can steal the brood, the honeybee brood, and bring it back and feed it to their young. So they're just depopulating the colonies in order to get their resource of the brood, which is what they're looking for, and which is obviously very, very problematic, and it can happen very, very quickly. Now, the Japanese honeybees, those that are endemic to Japan, they've evolved this really nifty group defense. That if you Google this, you'll see all sorts of videos that have thermal images and all this other stuff that's really, really cool, where they in essence ball the invading hornet, and they increase their their flight muscles to generate heat, just like they do in the middle of winter to stay warm, but they do it in this context to literally cook the hornet to death. And it's a really impressive and really cool behavior that pretty much keeps the Japanese hornet at bay for the Japanese honeybees. The problem is those Japanese honeybees aren't very prolific or productive. They don't make as much honey. So, Apis mellifera, our honeybees, have been introduced there to increase honey yields. And they don't have this group behavior, so they're very susceptible to attack. And so it's much harder to keep the European honeybees in Japan because of this hornet. And so the process of transference, if these hornets were ever to be introduced in areas outside of that native range, then they could be very, very problematic indeed. So the last topic that I'll talk about here is the things. These are the known unknowns, or the unknown knowns. I'm getting confused with my Rumsfeldisms, but these are the things that already exist here in the U.S. These are the things that we know about, that they're already here in the U.S., and we're still kind of unclear whether they can become worse threats, right? So these are potential threats of things that we already know that are already here, but we still need to know more about them, or there's something about them that could change that could make them a much worse problem than they are right now. For example, I was talking about viruses before and how we're kind of adding to our knowledge about them. There's emerging evidence that there's this new suite of viruses called the Lake Sinai viruses. There's at least 1, 2, and 3 different forms of this particular virus, and it's incredibly common. It's in upwards of like 20–30% of the colonies out there, and they can be associated with colonies that are unhealthy and that can collapse. So we're not really sure what's cause and effect there, and a lot more work has to be done with these viruses, but that's something that is certainly on the radar. Similarly, there are these other microbes. They're not viruses, they're not fungi, they're eukaryotic, and they're just parasites, microscopic parasites that live inside the guts of bees, called trypanosomes. And we've known about these things for quite a long time. In fact, the original CCD studies that were looking at, colony collapse disorder and what pathogens might be causing it, well, those trypanosomes were showing up fairly frequently, but they didn't seem to be showing up significantly more in diseased colonies versus healthy colonies. So we know these things are around, but again, there's still kind of a mystery as to what they are and what they're doing. Oh, sorry, I missed a question here. Are there any specific symptoms of Lake Sinai virus? That's an excellent question, and I don't think there are. I think that's one reason why they've been missed up until this point, that they don't really seem to be symptomatic. And in fact, a lot of these viruses are not. Deformed wing virus is an exception because you get these crinkled up wings sometimes, not all the time. But black queen cell virus is incredibly common, and a lot of other viruses are totally asymptomatic, at least directly, or at least obviously. But how it affects overall colony health is still kind of an unknown. So that's a really good question. Of course, we have the famous Africanized bees, which is in the southern third or so of the U.S., and they're kind of slowly encroaching their way up north. I just hope that they arrive in North Carolina the day after I retire. So we have no idea when they're going to arrive here. It's almost an inevitability, but kind of that's still a looming threat that we really don't know what the future holds when it comes to Africanized bees. I think that the sensationalism of Africanized bees may be dying out the more area that they're encompassing within the U.S. It's kind of hard to say, but it's still certainly something that will totally transform North Carolina beekeeping the moment that the first media reports come out that a verified case of them is found here. There's a question here about backyard beekeepers in different parts of the country are seeing bees absconding, and a few bees in the queen in the colony with good stores being reported all across the place. I've seen this in our own apiary. Symptoms of CCD are actually, that's a very Africanized trait. Late summer swarms or even swarms in the fall, where you have a queen or sometimes even several queens and a fistful of bees, just a few hundred bees. And sometimes they can try and be parasitic and try to get into another colony and take over that colony. That's a very, very Africanized trait. That's something that happens in Africanized regions all the time. And so when I saw this in our apiary, I just had the pit in my stomach. We sampled the swarm, and we actually, because we do this, we analyzed them genetically, and we verified that they were not Africanized bees. But it is a very Africanized trait. So there's a question now of, how much are Africanized bees, their genetics starting to bleed into other populations where they're starting to exhibit some of these classic Africanized behaviors, even though they're not highly defensive or they don't have some of the other traits. So that very well could be going on, but that takes a lot more genetic investigation than this diagnostic test of verifying if they're African or European descent. That's a really good question, and I would also qualify that as an existing but potential threat, but we don't really know how big a problem that is at this point. Another potential threat is a resurgence of honeybee tracheal mites. This is something Don and I were talking about before the webinar this evening, about how when they first came in the 1980s, they were wiping out colonies left and right, 80% infestation levels, colonies dying off. But as our bees adjusted to them, now the rates of them are less than 5%, not even 2%.
Yeah, it's at the moment rare.
So it's a very rare mite compared to varroa mites, obviously, which are ubiquitous. But that you know, could be a temporary thing, you know, that the equilibrium, the evolutionary arms race between host and pest, it's possible that there may be a resurgence in the tracheal mites. So we should not let our guard down on those and continue to stay vigilant about them. Question about Apiguard effectively taking care of tracheal mites as well as varroa mites. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that is true because it is a fumigant that all of the thymol-based products, which Apiguard, that's the main active ingredient, they are active against tracheal mites as well. So that is a 2-for-1 treatment for that. Yep, exactly. Another potential threat is antibiotic-resistant American foul brood. This is something that, again, the NCDA, they do these tests in the state. It has not been found in the state of North Carolina officially, but many other, probably half the states in the United States, have either documented or even rampant American foul brood that does not respond to antibiotics, or at least to tetracycline, right? But they have to use an alternative called Tylan or Tylosin, is the other antibiotic. But again, obviously, antibiotic-resistant bacteria can be incredibly problematic. Something that we do not want to get into. We want to try and avoid that at all possible, of course. And then finally, there's a lot of reports out there among commercial beekeepers, among the apiary inspectors here in North Carolina, and really coast to coast, of what they think is potentially a more virulent form of European foul brood, not American foul brood. This is something that could be associated with other things, such as viruses. So it's not just the bacteria that causes European, but it's only when it's in conjunction with certain other viruses that it can result in what some beekeepers have called snot brood, or otherwise, you know, a more virulent form of EFB. Classically, EFB, unlike AFB, is something that's more of a stress disease, that if the bees are chilled or if they're kind of not populous enough for their hive, that if you remove those stressors, that they can recover from it on their own. But this new form of EFB seems to spread even in healthy colonies, and so beekeepers need to be more responsive in that with antibiotic treatments or other things. And so trying to understand more about that, I think, and hopefully that it doesn't become a worse problem than it is right now, that's another threat that a lot of people are looking at as well. You guys have been very good at chiming in and mentioning some other potential problems. Am I missing any, or is there any others that you guys are seeing as far as things that we know about but are more problematic in recent years? I don't see any flooding. We must be comprehensive then, Don. I guess that's really good. Well, continue to type if you do have any thoughts, but I do want to conclude here that this is kind of a pretty disheartening topic and lecture, and so I want to end hopefully on a high note, which is, you know, don't be alarmed, you know, that these things are not here. We are not dealing with them, but it is good to be vigilant. It is good to be aware of them and to be monitoring for them, and to have some plans in place if they are ever to arrive. It does, however, underscore the importance of the regulatory agencies, and particularly of APHIS, which is we have to have a zero tolerance on the importation of live honeybees, the comb, or any other biological material that may be able to infect our bees. This has been in effect for 100 years, almost. It's almost 100 years since they put a ban on bringing in bees into the U.S. And so that continues. However, people have done it. People have brought in, queens in their pockets from other places in the world. That's how we got tracheomites. That's how we got varroa mites, right? So we all need, it has to be an absolute zero tolerance for all of us about bringing those things in. And then finally, just remaining to stay engaged with the local beekeeping community and the beekeeping industry, to stay posted as to any changes that might occur, so that if there is an introduction, if there is a potential problem, we may be able to eradicate it through quarantine or other type of mechanisms that the NCVA can impose, and just taking their lead to try to abate these potential problems before they get out of hand. So a couple other questions here. As far as, so thank you. 1922 is where the U.S. Honey Act regulated importation. Thank you very much, DJ, for that. And then, does Virginia have the same ban as North Carolina and South Carolina? Same ban on what? On the, it's the importation is federal, right? So this is from overseas. We can move bees across state lines in the U.S. and do so all the time, but Don and his counterparts in the other states, they need to inspect the bees before they leave and then when they arrive.
Yeah, we require a certification from the sending state before we issue permits from us, the receiving state, and we reciprocate that also, including out of state. We want to certify and send them certification to the receiving state.
Exactly. I don't know if you guys heard that, but it's this, you have to be certified to move your bees out of state, and then you have to be certified when they arrive in the new state. So I was referring to a federal ban on importation of live bees from other countries. So if you're traveling overseas, never, ever, 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 ever bring any bees back or anything remotely with bees. In fact, Don would probably say, don't bring your bee suit, don't bring your hive tool, don't bring your boots. But at the very least, no live bees or comb or anything that can get infected with the bees. Because these things are hard to quantify, who do we recommend sending our bees for sampling? Just as a form of maintenance. Well, again, this is where the apiary inspectors are just such a valuable resource here in North Carolina. They do some, certainly not all, of these monitoring things, but they're there to work with you, both with boots on the ground in the field, as well as sending things to Raleigh to do any further tests if they warrant it while they're out in the field. So there would be your first points of contact. Of course, there are other resources out there. The Beltsville lab of the USDA, they do certain tests. We have a new clinic here. It tends to specialize specifically on queens, as well as viruses and other diseases using molecular tools. So they tend to be pretty expensive. But that's just another niche that helps to complement and certainly not compete with the regulatory arms that we collaborate with all the time. Question about shipping packages from Georgia. Further south, it's a higher chances of Africanized bees. The answer is yes, but these guys get certified and tested constantly, right? And exactly. So that certification in Georgia, for them to have a permit to sell outside of the state, they have to be certified Africanized free. So they're being tested all the time. That isn't to say that that someday that there might be things that are missed, but the more testing and the more being proactive important. So I also like to abide by the reasoning that the Africanized bees have the reputation that they do because they're just not good bees to keep. So really we should be focusing on, you know, good bees and bad bees. And any bees, whether they be Africanized or not, we really need to kind of get rid of highly defensive bees or bees that are unproductive and requeen those and get rid of those. So it's really incumbent on us then to also make sure that we're vigilant about our own bees and being proactive about doing something about them if they're no good. So another question here is, isn't almond pollination a problem in that they import bees legally from Australia? That has been shut down for the last 5 years, I think, at least. But they were importing packaged bees from Australia. Those things were tested, you know, a lot for different viruses and all sorts of other diseases. But yeah, they were allowing them for a long time. Whether almond pollination is a problem, that's a political question, and I said I wasn't going to address this. Okay, so I guess one thing, before I get to some of these other questions that are starting to get off topic, I just want to wrap up this topic about potential threats to the U.S. And end with when our next webinar is going to be. And I unfortunately am announcing that this is the last webinar that we're going to be having, at least for the foreseeable future, in part because we do not have, nobody has scheduled us for our next webinar series, and it just so happens that this is a convenient time to put this series on hold under a hiatus, because just last month we had an announcement in our college that our department was merged with another department, so we've kind of been fused and dissolved. We're still in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, but we're now under a different umbrella, and so we're not really sure what that means for entomology and what that means for our program and what our emphases are going to be. So as we're working those things out, I'm just going to put this webinar series on hiatus, and we'll see where things go forward. So, but with that, I've really enjoyed these webinars and this particular webinar this evening, and I want to thank you all for your attention.